I'm happy to be here with our esteemed guest, Chris Kane, the founder of Jounce Media. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Dinesh, good to be here.
So yeah, why don't you start telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and about Jounce Media?
Sure, yeah. So I started Jounce in 2015, and the business has evolved over time, but the focus the whole way through has been trying to help our clients build as much of a rigorous understanding as possible about the way that money moves from DSPs to publishers, which is round numbers an 80 to $90 billion category. It spans a huge diversity of inventory, from web to mobile app to connected TV. My experience prior to starting Jounce was working hands-on keyboard in a few different contexts, helping some of the early trading desks get launched. And it just always felt to me like there was too much of a reliance on automation and not enough human oversight to some of the choices marketers are making about where to deploy their investments. And our whole business is oriented around trying to give marketers sort of like human scale data so that they can make more informed business choices and apply some more human oversight to the way that the automated buying systems work.
Okay, and how do you measure the money supply moving from buyer, advertiser to publisher?
Well, I think it's probably worth highlighting that a lot of the work that we do just simply wouldn't have been possible to do when we started the business, and certainly wouldn't have been possible to do when I was working hands-on keyboard running campaigns. The industry has recognized that there are quite a few pretty significant blind spots in the ability of marketers to really understand where their money goes. And in response to that, over the course of the last 5 years or so, there's been quite a bit of additional transparency that's sort of come to the industry, and that's fuel for our business. So we every day consume a huge diversity of data, including lots of publicly available resources, the details which are probably super critical for this conversation, but things like ads.txt and sellers.json, these industry initiatives that are public disclosures that help describe the way that money moves from DSPs to publishers. We consume that data. We've been consuming that data from the day it launched. We additionally tap into a bunch of private data sources, most importantly, monitoring live campaigns from a diverse group of global marketers. And so we monitor $600 million per year of spend, which round numbers is maybe 1% of the industry. And there's other data sources as well. The picture I'm trying to paint is simply that we're very data hungry. We're trying to bring in as much information as we can gather to quantify the way that the average campaign deploys its investment. And the core of our business is that data asset. We build a bunch of things on top of that data asset, but there's this core data asset that we operate that regenerates daily and makes estimates about how the average campaign and the average DSP deploys its investments across 1 million websites, 500,000 mobile apps, and 50,000 CTV apps.
Okay, and you brought us a presentation today, and that's based on your supply path benchmarking report, which you which you release on a monthly cadence. Could you maybe briefly explain what the report is about and why you produced that report and who it is aimed at?
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned there's sort of this like core data asset. That data asset's hard to work with. It's really interesting, but you've got to be an ultra power user to make sense of that internal data. We then build a variety of market insights products on top of that underlying data. We build an evergreen education program to teach our clients the basics of how money moves through the supply chain. We surface dashboards and data feeds. But what you were just referencing is once per month, we've been doing this for many years now, we publish a report that tries to provide a very data-driven analysis of certain topics that our clients are telling us they're wrestling with. Like I have the benefit of working with about 100 companies across the whole supply chain, from marketers all the way through to publishers, including lots of AdTech platforms. Through those relationships, I'm just pretty plugged in to the issues, the operational issues that buyers and sellers are wrestling with. And so once a month, we publish a research report that tries to provide a very data-driven analysis of some thorny supply chain topic. And so, the report that we'll talk about today, we published over the summer, and tries to put some rigor, or tries to help marketers put some rigor around the ways in which marketers, but especially the large agencies, are building strategic partnerships, not with DSPs, buy-side tech companies, but with SSPs, sell-side tech companies. And so historically, sort of to state the obvious, agencies had and continue to have close working relationships with demand-side platforms, the bidding systems where they're actually buying their campaigns, and haven't had a need, or at least an obvious need, to have partnerships with sell-side technology companies. And that's starting to change. For a variety of reasons, agencies are working more closely with SSPs. This report that we published over the summer tried to put a little bit more structure around, like, how do you, as an agency, thoughtfully make choices about which SSPs you want to be partnering most closely with, and also which SSPs you might want to be pretty cautious about doing business with.
Yeah, and speaking about supply path, so supply path optimization is a very hot topic in the AdTech industry, and maybe you could explain that for our audience and how you think SPO has impacted the industry.
Yeah, and this one, yes, of course, and this one requires some context. There's sort of this ballooning of complexity in the programmatic supply chain. So when I say programmatic supply chain, what I mean is the sequence of companies that touch the money between the marketer and the publisher. And so in a typical programmatic transaction, it would be that the agency pays its DSP, the DSP pays an SSP, and the SSP pays the publisher. That's about as short as it gets. But over time, for a variety of, I think, pretty dysfunctional reasons, nearly every publisher on the internet, I mean, far more than 99%, like 99% of publishers have adopted a very complicated mechanism of selling in which they, for every available impression, run many duplicate auctions through many SSPs. Additionally, many of those SSPs then initiate resold auctions through other SSPs. And so when a single impression is available on a single website or in a single mobile app or in a single CTV app, a DSP might be solicited 30 times to bid into that auction. And sometimes those supply chains are short. DSP pays an SSP who pays the publisher. Sometimes they're long. DSP pays an SSP who pays another SSP who pays the publisher. And when we talk about supply path optimization, we're talking about how to navigate that complexity from the perspective of a buyer. Like, how does a buyer and its ad tech partners make thoughtful choices about which impressions to buy in the first place, and then which pathway to use to participate in the auction for each available impression?
Yeah, so let's jump into the report. I mean, talk about the framework you use at Jounce and the methodology you use.
Sure. Yeah. Let me start. I'll pull up a slide in just a minute, but let me start just by trying to build out that complexity that I was getting into, and then I'll show you our simplified framework. The full math here is there's about 1.5 million websites, mobile apps, and CTV apps. Each one of them monetizes through, call it round numbers, 100 different supply chains. It's actually an underestimate, but let's be conservative about it. And so you're looking at a universe of 150 million different supply chains that are available to the average campaign and the average DSP. This is the point I was trying to get at earlier of being too dependent on automation. If you rely at that scale, 150 million pathways, of course you're dependent on automation, and you will forever be dependent on automation, and that's fine. But if you become totally dependent on the automation, particularly for using proxy KPIs, like optimizing to low cost or optimizing to high clicks, the automation just steers you in directions that any reasonable marketer would clearly object to. And so what we're trying to do is take the complexity of 150 million different supply chains and collapse it down to some very small number of business choices that a marketer could make to say, oh, these are the kinds of supply chains that I want to use, and these are the kinds of supply chains that I want to avoid. So anyway, with that context, our framework, our simplest framework, which I think is the most useful framework, is to take every supply chain and classify it into one of these 4 categories: rebroadcasting, cheap reach, made for advertising, and premium. And I think we're going to talk about all these in a lot of detail, so I'll just sort of give you like a one-liner on each of these here. But rebroadcasting is basically the bad kind of reselling. And I should say here, there are good kinds of reselling or valuable kinds of reselling. Rebroadcasting is just the simple multi-hop supply chain where, it's DSP pays an SSP who pays another SSP who pays the publisher, and it's financially inefficient and technically inefficient, and there's some other issues with those as well. That's rebroadcasting. Cheap reach means supply chains that lead to chronically non-viewable ad placements. I'll give you an example of that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Made for advertising has a real spotlight on it in the industry at the moment. It's a term that we use to describe publishers that engage in ad arbitrage, and as a result of their business model, create some vanity metrics that marketers sometimes view as attractive, but that fundamentally fail to drive business outcomes for marketers. And then everything else we call premium.
Okay. So let's jump into rebroadcasting. I mean, if you have any examples, or if you could explain the term in more layman terms, maybe for our viewers, and
I think an example.
maybe, I mean, yeah,
I think an example will help here.
And I mean, who does the reselling? Is it other is it SSPs, ad networks? Is there other intermediaries? And
I'll give you one example of a very high volume scenario, and there's literally millions like this.
yeah.
This is a direct path to sportsillustrated.com. This is a web example. This is even more common in the mobile app category. But on the web, here's a real example of a real supply chain that exists on Sports Illustrated. Sportsillustrated.com is exclusively monetized by the Arena Group. They don't, strictly speaking, own it, but they kind of have this perpetual license to monetize Sports Illustrated.
So that's
and so
the
a direct
publisher.
supply chain would be the DSP pays an ad exchange who pays the Arena Group. And so that might be, for example, like the DSP pays PubMatic, who pays the Arena Group, or DSP pays Google, who pays the Arena Group. That's a direct supply chain. And you can split the hair, sticking with my example of Google and PubMatic. You can kind of split the hair of, well, is it more efficient to buy DSP pays Google, who pays Arena, or DSP pays PubMatic, who pays Arena? I don't think that's the most important thing, but there are companies who are doing that. What we're talking about with rebroadcasting is not splitting that hair. It's trying to find structurally different supply chains that look like this. One of the Arena Group's demand partners is this company called Minute Media. They run an SSP. They're very widely adopted. They're very effective at bringing demand to publishers. One of the ways that Minute Media brings demand to the Arena Group is by initiating resold auctions. And so let's first read this chart right to left, and then we can read it left to right. Right to left is an impression is available on the Arena Group. Arena initiates an auction through one of its demand partners, Minute Media, one of its SSP partners. Minute Media then initiates an auction through some ad exchange, who then sends a bid request to a DSP. On the round trip, if the marketer buys, the chain of payment is the DSP pays an SSP, who pays Minute, who pays Arena. And our view is, given that there are so many structurally more direct supply chains, it's hard to see why a buyer would ever buy through this supply chain. This supply chain carries elevated fees, and so it requires the marketer to submit a higher gross bid. This supply chain has additional technical handoffs, which introduce a whole bunch of kind of like esoteric issues related to latency and other technical failures. And there are some other reasons beyond that you want to avoid supply chains like this. And so when we're talking about rebroadcasting, we're talking about these sorts of supply chains that have sort of unnecessary hops in them. And I think a key point here is, while we would guide a buyer to avoid these sorts of supply chains, I don't know that I would guide, I mean, the Arena Group's not a customer of ours, but I don't know that I would guide Arena to not sell this way. Like, this works for Arena. There's money that flows through the supply chain. And as long as buyers submit bids through these supply chains, it's pretty rational for a publisher like the Arena Group to continue to monetize this way.
So Arena in this example would be the publisher, right?
Correct.
So aren't there instances where the publisher works with an SSP and that's still like a direct integration and a close partnership, and that would also be classified as like a direct supply chain?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the Arena Group on Sports Illustrated has, I don't know the number top of mind, but it's going to work out to be like 25 demand partners. Minute Media, Google, PubMatic, several others. And every time an impression is available for, let's say, a banner ad, Arena initiates simultaneous auctions through all of these different SSPs. So they initiate a Google Ad Manager auction, they initiate a PubMatic auction, they initiate a Minute Media auction, and they initiate 22 other auctions. And then they let those SSPs do what they do to get demand and solicit bids from the buy side. And then those SSPs present back to Arena Group their best offer, essentially, and Arena picks the winner. In the case of their partnership with PubMatic, The only way that programmatic gets demand is from DSPs. Programmatic sends bid requests to the trade desk and DB360 and these other Amazon DSP and other major DSPs. That's the only way programmatic gets demand. And that makes all of programmatic's auctions on behalf of the Arena Group direct. Minute Media is different. When the Arena Group submits or initiates an auction through Minute Media, Minute, like programmatic, sends bid requests to some DSPs. But Minute Media doesn't have direct integrations with every DSP. And so Minute will initiate an auction through other SSPs who then send bid requests to DSPs. And so you have this like outrageously complicated like fanning out effect. You can like kind of picture like a network diagram where it starts with a single node. Like Arena makes calls to 25 partners. Those 25 partners each make requests to multiple DSPs, and some of them make requests to other SSPs who then go on to make requests to DSPs. And that sort of gets back to this point I was raising earlier, that for a single impression, a DSP might be solicited 20, 30, 40 different times.
Yeah, I got it. And I mean, what are some of the obvious like negative factors that rebroadcasting contributes with? I mean, both from an advertiser's point of view, but also from a publisher's point of view.
Well, okay, so there's basically three constituents here. There's the advertiser, there's the publisher, and there's the ad tech companies. For the publisher, this is all upside. I think that the number one reason as a publisher that you would object to the supply chain that's on screen here is it dilutes your net payout. You know, if a marketer, I'll back up a slide. If a marketer sends a $1 bid through this supply chain, the Arena Group might get 80 cents. If a marketer sends a $1 bid through this supply chain, the Arena Group might get 60 to 70 cents. And so it's dilutive. But I think publishers get themselves very comfortable with this, and rationally so, because they're sending auctions through so many different SSPs, and they're letting each SSP present its best offer, that sure, it's sort of structurally less likely this supply chain would produce the best net offer. But when it does, it's the rational choice for the Arena Group to take it. And further, it costs Arena Group or any publisher exactly $0 to run this auction. So this is just option value for the publisher. It's free option value to run lots of duplicate auctions and just see where you get the best offer. So in my judgment, this whole thing is structurally an issue for the industry, but is a perfectly rational choice for the Arena Group, and is, by the way, a perfectly rational choice for Minute Media. Like they're rationally doing what they can to bring the best bids back to their publisher partner.
Got it.
If you switch this to the buy side, the marketer does experience less attractive economics through the supply chain. The take rate's higher, meaning the marketer needs to submit a higher gross bid in order to clear the publisher's floor price or produce a competitive net bid. But I think there's so much complexity wrapped up in the supply chain. Like that's actually very hard for marketers to measure. My whole job is to measure this stuff. And honestly, it's like kind of hard for us to measure these sorts of differences. We're talking about, low single digit percentage differences in the ability for the marketer to sort of procure an impression. And that's just hard for a marketer to recognize as obviously inefficient. And so I think, you present the slide to a marketer, they're like, oh, I don't want to buy that way. But it's not totally obvious that turning off these sorts of supply chains immediately produces better outcomes for the marketer. I think the place where this really is going to come to a head at some point is the ad tech companies. Because these auctions are not free for ad tech companies to process. It's not free for the ad exchange who receives that reselling request per minute, and it's not free for the DSP. And so you get DSPs who are receiving 20, 30, 40x auction duplication. That massively drives up their operating costs. And there's like many like so what, like second derivative, third derivative effects here. But like at the most basic level, this apparatus is expensive for ad tech companies. It drives up their costs without helping them make more revenue, particularly on the buy side of the market. And if this is going to come to a head, it's going to be because DSPs say, we don't want to be participating in these sorts of supply chains. And for example, the trade desk has said that. There are some exceptions here and there, but like the trade desk won't even listen to these auctions. And that means that, a giant rounded up to $10 billion to spend, like a giant pool of demand just isn't participating in this supply chain or millions of others that are structurally like it. If that starts to happen at scale, then rebroadcasting auctions start to become much less economically productive for publishers, and publishers will create fewer of them.
So I guess, I mean, until that happens, being an SSP that doesn't partake in this, that would be a USP, I guess. Working with
Look,
this,
I think,
like such a partner, like
you
Trade
know,
Desk.
you and I have talked about this, and I think it's a very, this is probably the hardest choice in running a scaled SSP. Whether you're on in this box, whether you're on the Minute Media side of this or the Ad Exchange side of this, it is extraordinarily rare to find an SSP that doesn't do any reselling. Top of mind, I can think of one. There's probably two or three. Almost every SSP participates in these auctions because there's too much of an opportunity cost to not. If this is just how the money moves today. And I think, the senior management team at every SSP is thinking hard about how to manage reselling, or what we would call rebroadcasting, both whether to accept resold auctions from upstream partners and whether to initiate resold auctions through downstream SSP partners. And in every case, I think the basic point of view of these management teams, and I think it's the right point of view, is this is not durable revenue. We can't bake this into our 2026 financial forecast. Or if we do, we've got to put a huge discount factor on the amount of revenue that's going to flow through these kinds of supply chains. However, it's definitely part of our 2024 P&L. And we would be foolish. We would not be serving our investors if we had a wholesale policy of running zero of these rebroadcasting auctions. Or boy, if we're going to make that choice, we better have a very, very compelling business case for why that choice is going to pay back. Because the day we turn it off, we're definitely going to make less revenue.
Yeah. And I mean, you started talking about figures here. So at Media and Games Invest and at Verve Group, we generate roughly 80% of our media volumes from in-app. So how large is rebroadcasting in the in-app space?
Yeah, there's a pie chart that I'll pull up at the end here. But that pie chart is an aggregate across the whole internet, web, mobile app, and CTV. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think it says about 40% of auctions look like this, rebroadcasting. It's giant. If you split that, though, by environment, what you find is that this is actually less common on the web. And it's least common on the web. CTV is somewhere in the middle. And it's most common in mobile apps. And it is common to see mobile apps where 70, 80, 90% of bid requests come through these multi-hop reselling supply chains.
Yeah. And so going back to the methodology and the framework, let's go into cheap reach, which was another one of those classifications. I mean, briefly explain that. What is cheap reach?
Sure. And I think linking to what you were saying about MGI and Verve Group, this is very much a web concept. There's some examples of this in other environments, but this is really a web consideration. The idea here is on the web, it is common, not every publisher, but most publishers will commonly say, there are certain ad slots on the page that I want to control, typically the best ad slots. And then there are other ad slots that I'm going to delegate responsibility, where I'm going to delegate responsibility to a third party. That could be a mid-article video player. It could be a bottom-of-page content recommendations widget. It could be a bottom-of-page comment section. But the idea is, for a variety of reasons, publishers will say, there are going to be multiple companies that own rights to different ad products on my page. And some of those products we call cheap reach, meaning chronically non-viewable. Let me give you an example. This is anonymized, but I think it'll give you a feel. It's very representative, like a common web layout. At the top of an article page, you might find a large format video player controlled by the publisher. This might be an outstream player. It might be an in-stream player. The point is, it's sort of like the high quality ad placement, the thing that's going to have the best user attention and the highest viewability and the highest completion rates and so on. It's also going to be the most expensive. I'm going to scroll this page. Throughout the page, there's a bunch of other ads. But as I scroll this, at the very bottom of the page, there's another video player, which is not controlled by the publisher. This video player is controlled by an intermediary. And just to clarify the business backdrop here, the publisher in-house has an ad ops team that is responsible for managing direct sold campaigns, private marketplaces, the open auction. That in-house team sells this product. And so there will be, from the perspective of a DSP buyer, there will be auctions where the chain of payment is DSP pays an SSP who pays the publisher, and you buy this product. At the same time, on the same page view, there'll be some other company, some ad tech provider that also has an ad ops team, and that ad ops team is selling this product. And so at the same time, on the same page view for the same user, in addition to DSPs being solicited to bid into the auction for that publisher-controlled ad product, the DSP will also be solicited to bid into this intermediary-controlled ad product. And here, the chain of payment will be DSP pays an SSP who pays the intermediary, who then pays the publisher. And DSPs are pretty bad at recognizing this. Sort of the key point. It's the same user. It's the same URL. It's two video products. And critically, it's often the same SSP. And I don't think it's appropriate to sort of like talk specific names here, but like every major web SSP will sell both of these products. And so you might get a single exchange on a single page view running two simultaneous auctions that look extraordinarily similar to each other. It would require a DSP to be like very smart and sort of recognize that the chain of payment for auction 2 is different than the chain of payment for auction 1. But in the absence of that, it's not easy for the DSP to recognize that there are two fundamentally different ad products available on this page view. But if you look at the math, the viewability, for example, of these publisher-controlled products is 60, 70, 80%. And commonly, the viewability for these intermediary-controlled ad products is 5, 10, 15%. When DSPs or agencies or brands measure the viewability of their campaigns, they often look at it by site. Like, oh, when I buy video on site xyz.com, I get 40% viewability. I think I'll block it. Or they say I get 60% viewability. I'll keep it. These are judgment calls that marketers make, but they're working off averages, and they commonly miss the point. Like, that's a weighted average of one phenomenal ad product and one ad product that almost doesn't exist. Like you're just buying an ad product that is physically difficult to find and that is very rarely in the viewport. This is not big. I think it is a pretty glaring opportunity for DSPs to buy smarter, but it's not that big. This is a 3, 4, 5% of bid requests sort of a problem. Nevertheless, it's a point of inefficiency in the supply chain that is not currently well handled by most DSPs.
So when you say 3 to 5%, is that even on the web or in general, like overall?
Overall, 3 to 5% is probably more like 5 to 8% on the web, something like that. But I guess what I'm saying is like rebroadcasting is like a 40% problem. This is like a 5% problem.
So this is non-existent almost on in-app and CTV. It would
Correct.
It would be hard to have a non-viewable ad on CTV, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that if you want. There are some examples of that, but in the mobile app space, it's quite uncommon in games. The place where this exists in the mobile app space is in like news apps, where you do get an experience that kind of is structurally similar to the web, and you can get some chronically non-viewable, kind of like basically where there's a notion of a page, which wouldn't be the case in games. Where there's a notion of a page, you can get some mid-page and bottom-of-page ad products on mobile apps that have similar viewability issues.
So, but let's talk about the next classification then, made for advertising. What is that?
Yeah, so this is exclusively a web concept.
Okay.
And there is a lot of attention on this at the moment because over the summer, the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers in the US, published a report that focused on this. And it certainly wasn't the only thing that it covered, but it was sort of like the most notable finding from this research report that they've published. We've been studying this category since 2021, and I think we've just sort of built a richer understanding of how this works over time. I find it very difficult, unlike rebroadcasting and cheap reach, where I feel like you can probably just like with language help somebody understand it. I think this one's very hard to describe unless you see it. So let me just sort of work a real example, and I think it will sort of like help clarify the overall category. Let's say you're on a premium site like CNN.com, reading a story about Wimbledon. And you make it through the whole article, you get to the bottom of it, and now you're in the content recommendations section. These are those widgets that live at the bottom of not every, but many premium websites. You see these headline grabbing, clickbaity sorts of ads. The one that I'll focus on is the one that has the blue text. It says, these are the things that are normal in Japan but strange elsewhere. I've done it. I bet you've done it. You got to know.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just the clickbait works, and you click the clickbait, and you're gonna figure out what this thing is about. Yeah. And so you click this, and what happens in this moment is a second tab on your browser opens. And just to be clear about where we are right now, if you focus on the screenshot on the right here, you can still see the CNN tab in an inactive tab. And now there's a new tab that just opened up definition.org, a website. In this moment, the publisher of definition.org, it's a company called Spine Media, paid for this click. They specifically paid Outbrain. That's the company that operates that content recommendations widget at the bottom of CNN. And so Spine Media pays 5 cents to Outbrain. Outbrain keeps some of that money and pays some of it back to Warner Brothers Discovery, which is the publisher of CNN. And so CNN makes some money here. Outbrain makes some money. Spine Media is currently in the hole. They're 5 cents cash out of pocket. Okay, so now they got to make back 5 cents of advertising. And the way you turn a blank canvas like this into more than 5 cents of ad revenue is to create a very dense, I think, user hostile ad experience. You flank the viewport with banner ads. You have an auto-playing video. That's that McDonald's thing in the top right. You refresh all of this quickly. You construct a slideshow experience so that people are clicking the next button, giving you more opportunities to refresh the page and sell more ads. And if you do that effectively enough, you can make more than 5 cents. And now you've got an arbitrage opportunity. And this arbitrage opportunity very much exists. It certainly existed historically. There's more pressure on it now. This category of supply, this concept, and there's several variations of it, but this concept works out to be currently about 20% of all web auctions. It grew to be as big as 30% over the summer. And it's a business that works. It's not a high margin business. In fact, it's a very thin margin business, but it's positive margins. You can make the arbitrage work. Two more important things here. I think a marketer looks at this screenshot and has some concerns. The intuition is this doesn't seem like ad products that are going to help sell cruises for Norwegian or hamburgers or for McDonald's or whatever else. And that intuition, by the way, is correct. I'll come back to that. But DSPs have a very hard time recognizing that this is low quality supply for most campaigns, because many campaigns will have a hard time measuring sales. Whether you're a pharmaceutical advertiser, there's one on this page, or a quick service restaurant, there's one on this page. If you're an auto manufacturer or a CPG company, it's very hard to measure whether the ads you buy on the internet drive real world sales. And so those campaigns will task their DSPs with a variety of other KPIs. They'll say, I only want to buy brand safe inventory. I want to make sure I have high ad viewability. If I'm buying video, I want high video completion rates. And I'd like it as inexpensively as possible. Well, here you are. This is it. This is brand safe, high viewability, high video completion rate, low cost supply. And so DSPs are being tasked to achieve certain KPIs. These sites achieve those KPIs.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of research on this. They fail to drive sales. Marketer or consumer purchase decisions are not influenced as a result of this advertising. But for marketers who have a hard time measuring those things, these sites tend to gobble up a lot of budget because they hit the flawed proxy metrics. And
but I mean,
there is a real spotlight on this at the moment. Go ahead.
And I mean, that must be true for the cheap reach as well, right? Driving real life or real world sales.
I have not done that work because it's just not a big enough pool of supply to really study. I mean, we've really done the work to really be able to substantiate that this category of supply doesn't drive sales. I would subscribe to your hypothesis that cheap reach probably doesn't drive sales as well, but we have not done that work.
But so consider a DSP. So if you just look at the market as being effective, so consider a DSP that doesn't do a lot or doesn't provide a lot of supply that is MFA or cheap reach. I mean, if a advertiser uses that DSP and other DSPs, wouldn't they eventually figure out that, okay, the DSP that doesn't work with the MFA advertisers, we recognize much better results there going through that DSP, and shouldn't more than ad dollars just flow into that DSP, and eventually that would lead to this kind of supply dwindling out over time?
Look, I am more optimistic than I've been in 8 years of running Jounce Media. The industry is making progress here. But there are very few marketers who have the capacity to do the thing that you just said. And that is why that's why this thing has not just persisted but grown over the course of many years. Yeah. One of the things that's been really interesting to me and that has shaped my thinking on this is, I mentioned, we get the benefit of monitoring a lot of campaigns through a lot of DSPs. Campaigns that measure sales, typically e-commerce campaigns, run away from this supply. DSPs that are overwhelmingly tasked with driving performance, like sales for marketers, run away from this supply. Campaigns, though, for auto, pharma, QSR, CPG, that have a hard time measuring sales, run toward this supply. And it suggests that DSPs know something. I'm not suggesting they're not doing their job. I think they very much are. They know that when a marketer tasks them with delivering certain KPIs, specifically sales, this is a bad pool of supply. And so implicit in a DSP, there is a recognition that this supply doesn't drive sales. But when a DSP's customer does not task it with driving sales and instead tasks it with driving a bunch of, I think, flawed proxy metrics, well, the rational thing for the DSP to do is buy the supply. And critically, I think it's appropriate to sort of talk in specifics. The Trade Desk has had a long-standing policy not to buy this supply. For many years, they were way out ahead of the industry on this stuff. I'm not convinced at all that they benefited from that business decision. In fact, I think they lost business because of that business decision. I think there are marketers who are not able to achieve the ultra-attractive, low-cost, high viewability KPIs through the Trade Desk that they could through other DSPs, and instead chose to work with other DSPs. Now, that Trade Desk obviously not had any trouble over the last couple of years, but perhaps that growth could have been even faster. There are definitely stories of marketers who have taken campaigns from the Trade Desk somewhere else. I think the backdrop is Trade Desk's decision to block MFA.
Okay. So let's talk about the good kind of supply, or the best kind of supply, the premium supply.
Yeah. Our industry has a bad habit, I'm guilty of it, of talking about all the bad parts. I think we've gotten the bad parts out of the way. And there's other small bad parts, but these are the three big ones. And everything else we then call premium. One of the things that has been a big mind shift for me, and I think if we're successful doing our job, will be a mind shift for the industry, is that premium supply is hundreds of thousands of websites and apps, but you don't have to think of it as hundreds of thousands of websites and apps. You can simplify your thinking. This is another example of where we're trying to enable people to think like people and get to human scale data. These 100 logos we call bellwethers. There are many other companies that we would classify as premium, but these are the 100 largest sources of premium supply. A&E Networks, AccuWeather, Activision Blizzard, and so on. That spans CTV inventory, web inventory, mobile app inventory. This is banner ads, native ads, video ads. And so you've got a huge diversity of supply here. These 100 companies each operate very scaled portfolios, sometimes with thousands of sites in them. That's especially true for sales houses. There are companies on here, Raptive, Mediavine, Freestar. These are companies that are not publishers, but that will work with mid-size and especially long-tail independent content creators and say hey, Sally's Baking Addiction, keep making great recipes. You do the thing that you're great at. Let us take over the monetization. We'll monetize your site for you. And they secure exclusive sales rights. The picture I'm trying to paint here is, in total, these 100 companies control about 55,000 different websites and apps. Those 55,000 different websites and apps capture 85% of premium spend. And so if, as a marketer, you can get comfortable moving away from the idea of playing whack-a-mole and trying to block the cheap reach and the rebroadcasting and the MFA and the whatever else, and move toward an inclusion list. Your inclusion list strategy can be really simple. You can say, here's my starting point. This is what I'd recommend, but you don't have to choose my 100. Pick your own 100.
Yeah.
I'm going to make 50 to 100 business choices of these scaled portfolios that I trust, and I'm exclusively going to do business with those portfolios. Now, that translates to tens of thousands of sites and apps, but I'm not making tens of thousands of choices. I'm making a few dozen business choices. And I'm hopeful. I think there are some barriers to getting there as an industry, but this is starting to happen. And I'm hopeful that if the big brands and the big agencies adopt this concept of picking trusted portfolios, that they would structurally, that two things would happen. A, they would structurally insulate themselves from the next ad tech fiasco, because we know there's going to be another one, right? Like MFA is the current ad tech issue. There's going to be a new one. And that if you exclusively transacted with trusted portfolios, you are very likely to insulate yourself from the next ad tech issue. And B, that you create as a buyer much healthier incentives for the sell side of the market. You no longer incentivize publishers to initiate rebroadcasting auctions or operate cheap reach placements or engage in ad arbitrage. And instead, you create incentives for publishers to meet the highest quality standards so that they get added to your inclusion list.
And I mean, these 100 publishers, they attract roughly 85% of the premium DSP spend. So there must be a very long tail, I imagine, attracting the rest of the 15%.
This is probably the biggest flaw with this recommendation. Yeah. And to be clear, I stand by the recommendation. But here's the biggest flaw with this. The big guys are all on here, right? Hearst is here, Disney is here. You're not going to miss the major publishers. In a non-obvious way, the very best independent content creators that you've never heard of are also here because they partner with Raptive and Mediavine and Freestar. And so you get this barbell where this strategy would include the very largest incumbent media companies and the emerging independent content creators. But it leaves out the Seattle Times. Like the Seattle Times is not on here. They go it alone. They have an in-house team that monetizes a single website. And we have not included them in our bellwether list. And I think it would be very easy for a typical agency or brand to not make a choice not to do business with the Seattle Times. Just forget, like you will just overlook the mid-market. And I do think that is happening. I think there's a tough, whether we exist or not, I think there's a challenging road ahead for mid-market publishers. If you're tiny and you join one of the major sales houses, you're in the mix. If you're giant, you're Disney, of course you're in the mix. But boy, if you're in the middle, I think there's a tough road ahead.
Mm-hmm. And so let's move on and talk about, you said you had a graph showing the mix of bid requests available to DSP buyers.
Yeah, so if you sort of like zoom this whole thing out, across all the environments, all the media types, this is the basic shape of this thing. That rebroadcasting works out to be just shy of 50%, call it 40, 45% of all bid requests, which, just to the point I was raising earlier, that is a huge drain on the economics of the ad tech apparatus. That means half of the auctions, half of the transport cost and the network cost and the processing cost of ad tech companies is through auctions that are obviously duplicative. Because that's rebroadcasting. Cheap reach, as I said before, is small, 3 to 5% of auctions. Made for advertising is a very dynamic thing. Currently, it's about 20% of auctions, but that number has moved a lot. And so you get to premium auctions being about 40% of the bid stream. Premium, to be clear, includes the 100 bellwethers plus a bunch of other things. But what we're saying is about 40% of auctions are maximally direct supply chains to inventory that meets some basic quality standards. And, I think that premium supply is underrepresented in the bid stream. It shouldn't be 40% of the bid stream. It should be 80 to 90% of the bid stream. And because it's underrepresented in the bid stream, it's undermonetized. So our basic point of view is there's a major opportunity for marketers to focus their investments on premium supply, knowing that it's undermonetized and is high ROI. At the same time, until marketers move, I struggle to see how an SSP would make a rational business choice to only monetize premium supply.
Yeah. So, and talking about SSPs and premium supply, you do measure sales rights for AdTech companies, right? And talk a little bit about the process there and explain sales rights.
Right. So this is a big, long buildup to the report that you and I were talking about a minute ago.
Yeah.
More and more agencies and sometimes brands, but mostly agencies, are trying to build these sort of like strategic alliances with SSPs. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I think it makes a lot of sense. There are over 100 SSPs that we track. Very few of them have exclusive sales rights to anything. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of SSPs selling the same impressions, right back to our Arena Group example before. Mm-hmm. And so in very broad strokes, buyers have leverage here, right? Like buyers have many options of which marketplaces to use to procure inventory. And that gives them business leverage. And they can show up to Verve, or they could show up to another SSP and say, we are considering turning off our bidding into most SSPs and exclusively bidding into 3 or 4. Let's talk about what a business partnership would look like if we spent more of, if we elevated our share of wallet with Verve Group or with some other SSP. And so we're trying to provide some frameworks and some rigor to help those agencies make the most of their leverage and make smart business choices. One of the things that I think gets most overlooked is when agencies make these partnership decisions with SSPs is this pie chart. I think agencies often overlook the reality that the biggest, most scaled, most reputable SSPs sell the very best of the open internet and the very worst of the open internet. That's how you come to be a big SSP. And that means that if you're going to double down on a partnership with an SSP, you got to get comfortable with the mix of traffic that's available and have solutions to kind of curate it. Yeah. And so this report that we pushed out in over the summer, I think it was July, for any SSP measures their sales rights across these 2 dimensions of premium versus sub-premium supply, where premium is what we talked about and sub-premium is any of rebroadcasting, cheap reach, and MFA. And so what you can do, methodology, we can probably skip in really some of the details, but what you can do conceptually is plot any SSP on this 2-dimensional chart. And you can say, well, what do your sales rights look like? Are you selling only premium supply, only sub-premium supply, a mix of the 2? Everybody's selling a mix of the 2. And then how much of it? You know, what's your breadth of sales rights? And so if an SSP lived in the bottom right corner here, that would mean they only sell premium. They sell all of the premium supply and nothing else, right? If you're bottom right, it's 100% sales rights for premium supply, 0 rights for sub-premium supply. If you live in the top right, that means you sell everything. You sell all of the sub-premium supply and all of the premium supply. I think the place where we can focus this conversation is the app category, where, you know, that's the core of the Verve Group business. Yeah. But just sticking with this example for a moment, if you did this for the web, what we found in our July report is the household name SSPs, like the names you can think of, all cluster in the top right corner here, which is the rational choice for those businesses, but also creates a curation challenge for marketers. If a marketer is going to partner deeply with one of the major web SSPs, they almost definitely don't want to buy everything that SSP sells. And they should be talking with that SSP about, like, how do we thoughtfully curate? Maybe it's that bellwether list. Like, how do we thoughtfully curate which auctions are available to our DSP seats from your exchange? And that's happening. And nobody on the web lives in the bottom right. There literally is not a company in that gray region in the bottom right. Because that's the shortcut, right? Like, oh, just let me find the SSP that only sells the good stuff. It's like, well, sorry, that doesn't exist for the reasons we talked about. SSPs have incentives to sell everything. Yeah. If we focus on the app category, this is what the scatter plot looks like. It's different. And what you get is some companies across the very bottom here, which have basically no access to sub-premium supply, but also have generally low scale. And so these tend to be ad networks who have very different incentives from typical SSPs. These are the ad networks that are primarily driving cost per install campaigns for managed service buyers. and that because their primary business is driving sales for or driving installs for advertisers, don't want to be participating in sub-premium auctions. Like
that makes
they've
sense, right?
they've figured it out, right? And then now they've also morphed into SSPs, and they will sell their inventory to DSPs, and so they don't have any access to sub-premium supply, but they also have 50 to 60% coverage. And so there's like huge gaps in those portfolios.
Mm-hmm.
And as you get to the companies that push further to the right, there's some exposure, not massive exposure, but some exposure to sub-premium supply. Verve Group is over here, far out to the right, with non-zero but low access to sub-premium supply. And I think, Dennis, you can speak to this better than I can, but like to me, like this is very emblematic of the way that SSPs are required to sort of thread this needle of prioritizing premium supply, which is where the durable revenue is, but being thoughtful about recognizing where are the highest volume sources of sub-premium supply, particularly rebroadcasting in the mobile app category, where there's demand. Because as long as there's demand, it's sort of the job of an SSP, Verve or others, to be able to sort of sell the product that the marketer wants to buy.
So the way to read this would be that, so for instance, Verve here has roughly 85% sales right to the premium app supply that you're looking at, right? The collection of apps you're looking at, yeah. And I mean, you view that as a good proxy for the overall app markets because you have quite a extensive set of apps you look at.
Yeah, I mean, we track over 500,000 apps, quantify the spend that goes to each of them. There are very few that do not work with Verve, and work directly with Verve, critically.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you got it exactly right. Verve has sales rights Verve has direct integrations with the app developers that capture roughly 85% of programmatic revenue.
Yeah. And when you look at the non-premium supply, I mean, in this case, it's mostly rebroadcasting, like you said, because we're looking at in-app. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And I mean, why do you think, I mean, you kind of alluded to this, but why do you think no one exists down on the right? Is it just like the financial incentive, basically?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Thinking.
And I have made some mistakes historically I think I've always sort of chose my words carefully, but the reality is in my mind, I sort of thought of good guys and bad guys, good publishers and bad publishers, or good SSPs and bad SSPs, or good DSPs and bad DSPs, as if like some are operating above board and some are not. And I think that's such an unproductive way to think about this. I think there are rational actors in this industry. And on the sell side of the market, the rational thing to do, frankly, the financially responsible thing to do, is to sell products that marketers want to buy. And on the web, if marketers want to buy MFA, how could you justify not selling? It's like a grocery store selling junk food. It's like I might not feed the junk food to my family, but if I don't put junk food on the shelf, people are going to go shop somewhere else. And I think that is largely the dynamic for SSPs, that whatever your idealized version of the open internet doesn't matter. What matters is there's demand for certain products, and it's the job of SSP to sell those products to buyers. I think it's very important for SSPs to recognize, based on the whole buildup that we just talked through here, that the incentives might be changing. As marketers become more educated by the ANA and others, it's like, oh, things change. Like there's much more thin demand for MFA today than there was 6 months ago. And so I think it's critical for SSPs to have some awareness that, hey, this picture could change, and it could be that demand really dries up for this sub-premium supply. So we do not want to bet our business on sub-premium supply. Yeah. But at the same time, there's definitely demand on, in November of 2023, and making some sort of like a principled or idealized version not to sell sub-premium supply has only financial downside to the publisher, to the SSP, and B, has no impact on the industry. If you don't sell it, there's how many other dots are on this chart? There's dozens of other SSPs that will sell it. And so I just think, that we need to frame this as like, what's the rational behavior of each individual actor? Because the rational thing is what is going to happen here.
And I mean, you mentioned ad networks as well. So this chart contains ad networks and SSPs, right?
Well, it contains any company that sells inventory to DSPs. Now,
Okay.
most of these companies, Verve included, are sort of like
Yeah.
multi-tentacled, complicated businesses. And so the companies across the bottom, I think, I don't think it's appropriate to like name all the names here, but like they're the companies that if you saw the list, you'd be like, oh, those are ad networks. And I think
Yeah.
what that means is those are companies that sell campaigns directly to performance advertisers. But those companies do also operate as SSPs and make their inventory available to third-party DSPs. But what's
Yeah.
different is they have structurally different incentives from a pure play SSP,
Hmm.
because their main business is driving installs for advertisers, and that means that the supply that they would rationally choose to focus on is going to be different than the supply that an SSP would rationally choose to focus on.
And I mean, looking at the reach here in the graph, I mean, it's safe to say that the largest players are represented in the chart, right?
Oh yeah, every mobile
Yeah.
app company, every mobile app
Yeah.
technology provider that you can think of is on this chart.
Yeah. And I mean, if I'm not mistaken, in the report they're not anonymized, right?
No,
For
they're not,
anyone
for sure.
interested. Yeah.
Yeah, everything's
Okay.
It's just when the report goes out to only companies that are under non-disclosure agreements with us, and I'm a little more reluctant to sort of like talk in specifics in a public
Yeah.
forum.
So what do you think about the ad tech market and going forward? What do you think will happen in the next few
Well,
years?
well, I think really what is going to drive the market, and this has been the case historically as well, but it's all about demand. Um, that's even true in the connected TV space. I think there's a bit of a narrative that like, oh, the connected TV media companies have so much leverage. Like, well, yeah, they have more leverage than a mid-market web publisher, but they don't have
Hmm.
more leverage than a large agency. They just don't. Um, and that's becoming even more true in all of these categories as supply proliferates. There's a lot more streaming content today than there was 2 years ago. And so as the ability to reach an audience becomes more commoditized, it becomes even more important to be aligned with demand, because that's where the industry leverage is. I think investors reflect that in the way they value DSPs versus SSPs. I think the dynamics of the industry clearly reflect that. The buy side has a huge amount of leverage to push through new industry initiatives. The sell side doesn't. All of this to say, I think the companies that win are the companies that have proprietary demand. That doesn't specifically mean DSPs, to be clear. In fact, DSPs in many ways are losing their control of demand. More and more, um, the grip that DSPs had on demand is actually slipping, and it's moving to the sell side. You find more and more agencies like Group M saying that they're building curated marketplaces powered by certain SSPs. Now the SSP controls that demand. And the DSP gets kind of demoted to essentially dumb workflow status. They don't actually
Mm.
control the demand. They are just a workflow tool used by buyers, and all of the demand relationships happen on the SSP side. There are cases where publishers control demand. I mean, that probably is the most compelling argument for why media companies in CTV have power. It's because Disney and Warner Brothers Discovery and others have deep, decades-long relationships with buyers, and they have direct control of how the demand gets executed. I mean, just to riff on this for a half a minute more, increasingly when Paramount sells private marketplaces to buyers, all of the targeting and all of the reporting happens on the Paramount side. And the ad tech apparatus literally doesn't even know the ad product that it's buying. Like the way the auction is structured is just a buy order from Paramount to a DSP. Say, this buyer has said they want to transact on this deal ID. I'm not telling you anything about what it is. I'm not telling you the content. I'm not telling you the app. I'm not even telling you the kind of device that this is. It's just an instruction to buy. Their Paramount controls the demand. And so it doesn't have to be saying that controlling demand is critical is not the same as saying DSPs win. It's the companies that control the demand are going to be the ones that sort of shape the market.
Very interesting. I would like to thank you, Chris. I mean, I learned a lot from today's discussion. It was very insightful. And I mean, do you have any closing remarks or anything you would like to add or plug from your side?
No, I think all I would say is, we're in the business of trying to more appropriately balance automation with human oversight. And I hope that, what investors, who are presumably the core audience here, start to sort of think about is there are ways in which automation has resulted in, I think, a pretty severe misallocation of investments. And if we're part of a broader wave in the industry of encouraging brands and agencies to just think like marketers and continue to use the automation, but put a lot more human oversight on top of it, that's going to have very significant impacts in a reallocation of spend, which is going to create not a growth or contraction of the market, but a lot of winners and losers, a lot of share shift within the market.
All right. Thank you again, Chris.
Dinesh, thanks.
And to our viewers and listeners, thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us at info@mgi-se.com or visit our website, mgi-se.com. Thank you.